My parents were trying to push immigrants out, but I fell in love with a Cuban girl. They called it protecting the neighborhood. My parents liked to believe they were defending tradition, preserving values, keeping things clean. But the truth? They were trying to push immigrants out, one by one, family by family, letter by letter. They fought to silence voices that didn't sound like theirs. They tried to erase accents, colors, cultures. And then, I fell in love with a Cuban girl. I thought I could keep them apart. I thought I could live in two worlds. But love doesn't whisper, it demands to be heard. And when my parents found out, they gave me an ultimatum. They had no idea what I was willing to do for her. Before I take you into the chaos that followed, don't forget to follow this channel for more true stories that uncover what happens when love and loyalty collide. Now, let me tell you how it all started. I met Lucia in the most ordinary way. It was a Saturday morning, and I was late to meet a friend at a cafe near downtown. The place was packed, loud, steaming with espresso machines and the soft murmur of jazz in the background. I was scanning for a seat when I saw her. She was alone at a small round table, reading a worn-out book in Spanish and sipping something that smelled like heaven. Her curls framed her face like sunlight, and her skin glowed with warmth that didn't belong to winter. She looked up and caught me staring. "Buscas asiento?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair. I froze for a second. My Spanish was decent, thanks to college courses and a semester abroad, but I hadn't expected it. "Sí," I replied, and then smiled. "Mind if I join you?" She nodded, and I sat. I forgot all about my friend. Her name was Lucia Ortega. She was 24, studying architecture, and working part-time as a server to cover her tuition. She came from Havana, but had lived in the U.S. since she was 18, just long enough to feel like she didn't belong anywhere completely. "I miss home," she said, twirling her spoon in her coffee. "But I love it here. Most days." "Why just most?" She gave me a knowing look. "You haven't been on a bus where someone mutters, 'Go back to your country,' under their breath yet, have you?" I didn't know what to say. I'd never been the target of that kind of hatred. My family had roots here dating back 3 generations. I grew up in a gated community, where the closest thing to struggle was a power outage during a storm. And yet, something about her voice, her eyes, made me want to understand. We talked for 2 hours. When I left, I had her number scribbled on the back of my receipt and a knot in my chest I didn't understand. I didn't tell my parents about her. At least not at first. My father, Harold, was the president of the neighborhood association. My mother, Elaine, ran the Cultural Preservation Committee, which, in truth, was just an excuse to complain about declining standards. They'd fought against a local mosque, campaigned to shut down a Salvadoran food truck, and once wrote letters to ICE about a family they suspected of having suspicious papers. And I, Mark, was their perfect son. Clean-cut, educated, polite. I was supposed to marry a girl from our church, buy a house 2 blocks away, and carry on the Carter legacy of quiet bigotry and respectable intolerance. But then came Lucia. We started seeing each other in secret. Cafes. Library corners. Long walks through the park. I told her the truth about my family early on, expecting her to run. She didn't. "Maybe they'll change," she said one night. "People do." "They won't," I replied. She kissed me anyway. With her, I felt something I'd never known before, like I was unlearning the lies I'd been taught all my life. She showed me the world through her eyes. Vibrant, painful, beautiful, and real. But secrets have a way of slipping through the cracks. It started with a photo. Someone saw us downtown, laughing, hand in hand. The picture made it to the HOA Facebook group. From there, it spread like wildfire. And then came the dinner. That night would change everything. The dinner was supposed to be just the 3 of us, my parents and me. Sunday roast, as usual. A Carter tradition. The smell of rosemary chicken and buttered carrots filled the house, warm and familiar, but everything felt wrong. The moment I walked in, I knew they knew. My mother was wearing her favorite pearl earrings, the ones she only wore when she wanted to project calm authority. My father stood with a glass of scotch in hand, pacing slowly by the fireplace, as if rehearsing a speech. I sat down, my hands already sweating. "Everything okay?" I asked. My mother smiled tightly. "We saw something online." Straight to it. My father walked over and set his drink on the table. "Mark, we saw a photo of you, downtown." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. "With a girl," my mother continued. "A Latina girl." Her voice was so cold it could have frozen the wine in her glass. I cleared my throat. "Her name is Lucia." "Is she legal?" my father asked. I blinked, stunned. "What? Does she have papers?" he repeated. "Because we don't need another problem in this neighborhood." I felt something twist in my chest, rage, shame, fear. Maybe all of them at once. She's a student. She works. She pays taxes. And yes, she's here legally. "That's not the point," my mother said. "The point is, people are talking. You're drawing attention." "To what?" "To the fact that I'm dating someone who doesn't look like your country club friends." They both fell silent. My father finally sat across from me and said, "We've worked hard to build a life of order, Mark. And this isn't order." I leaned back, my jaw clenched. "This is love." "You think that matters?" my mother snapped. "Do you know how fast someone like her can ruin everything you've worked for?" I stood up. My plate was untouched. The room spun slightly with the weight of what I was about to say. "I'm not ashamed of her," I said. "I'm ashamed of you." And then I left. I went straight to Lucia's apartment, knocking with shaking hands. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug. I cried into her shoulder for the first time in years. Not because I was afraid of losing my family, but because I realized I already had. The next week was war. My parents didn't call. They didn't text. But they worked behind the scenes. I found out they removed me from the HOA mailing list. My father blocked my number. My mother told Lily I was under the influence of someone who doesn't share our values. Lucia, meanwhile, received a letter from the landlord. A noise complaint. She lived alone. Didn't even own a speaker. Then came a sudden routine inspection from her building's management, accompanied by a police officer. They didn't find anything. But the message was clear. We were being watched. "I think your parents are doing this," Lucia said one night, sitting beside me on her couch. "They're trying to scare me. Maybe even get me evicted." I believed her. And it enraged me. I decided to confront them again. I went back to the house and rang the bell. My father opened the door but didn't invite me in. "You need to stop whatever you're doing," I said. "Leave her alone." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Noise complaints? Police inspections? Do you think this will break us up?" He folded his arms. "I think you've forgotten where you come from." "No," I said. "I finally know who I am. And who I'm not." He stared at me for a long moment. "You'll regret this," he said. "I already regret not walking away from you sooner." Then I turned and left. This time, for good. Lucia told me I didn't have to choose. That I could still have a relationship with my parents if I wanted. That she'd understand. But she didn't realize they'd already made the choice for me. Their silence. Their aggression. Their threats. I wasn't going to split my life in two. I wanted all of it, with her. So, I started making changes. I moved out of my family's investment property and got a place with Lucia. A small one-bedroom in the arts district, close to her school and my work. We painted the walls ourselves and bought mismatched furniture from garage sales. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We stopped hiding. We went out in public. We posted photos. And the messages started pouring in. Some were cruel. But others were kind. My parents are like yours. You give me hope. I'm Puerto Rican and my fiancé's family still won't talk to us. Thank you for sharing this. You too give me courage. We weren't alone. And we weren't going to live like we were. 3 weeks after I moved in with Lucia, our landlord called us in for a meeting. He looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact, and sipping from a mug labeled, "World's Okayest Boss." "There's been some pressure," he said finally. "From who?" I asked. "The neighborhood board," he muttered. "I've been getting emails. Messages. They say the building's changing. That it's attracting a crowd that doesn't reflect community standards." Lucia sat up straighter. "What does that even mean?" He wouldn't look at her. "It means people are watching. And asking why I allow renters who stir up trouble." "We haven't done anything wrong," I said. "We pay rent. We're quiet. We follow the rules." "I know," he said. "But there's talk of a petition. The HOA might try to push for new restrictions." Lucia laughed, but it wasn't joyful. "Let me guess, no non-citizens, no couples cohabiting without marriage, and definitely no Cubans?" He said nothing. That silence told us everything. When we got home, Lucia went straight to the balcony and sat cross-legged on the floor, staring out over the street below. I brought her tea and sat beside her. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They'll keep coming." "Then so will we," I replied. We decided to fight back, legally, publicly, loudly. I contacted a civil rights attorney. Lucia reached out to the immigrant advocacy group on her campus. We started collecting statements from neighbors who supported us, and there were more than we expected. Young families. Students. A black couple down the hall who dealt with the same tactics a year earlier. Together, we drafted a counter-petition. Protect residents from cultural discrimination and targeted harassment. Within 72 hours, it had 800 signatures. Within a week, it had 2,500. The tide was shifting. But my parents weren't finished. It came in a crisp envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed and signed. "If you truly loved her, you'd let her go. She doesn't belong here. And you don't belong with her. The world you're building will destroy everything your family created. Turn back while you still can." Lucia read it and folded it calmly. This is how they fight. Cowards with keyboards. But I knew who sent it. The phrasing. The tone. The veiled threat disguised as tradition. It was my mother. She always said things like, "the world you're building," and "what we created." Her fear wasn't just about Lucia. It was about losing control. I called her. She didn't answer. So I left a voicemail. "You raised me to stand up for what's right. To speak clearly, to act with conviction. I guess you didn't expect me to use those lessons against you. But I am." Lucia received another email that week, from a journalist. He'd seen our petition, read the comments, and wanted to know more. "I think your story could help others," he wrote. "You're not the only ones going through this." We hesitated. Telling our story meant becoming visible targets. But it also meant forcing people like my parents to see the faces behind the fear they manufactured. We agreed. It was published the following Tuesday. Love in the Crossfire, when community turns against its own. Our faces were on the homepage. Smiling, arms wrapped around each other, standing on our balcony. The piece was honest. It told the truth about the petition, the harassment, the racism disguised as regulation. It even quoted a few of our supporters, neighbors who had witnessed it firsthand. And it named my parents, Harold and Elaine Carter, leaders of the HOA, instigators of the campaign. The response was immediate. Local radio picked it up. University blogs spread it. By evening, national outlets were calling. And the HOA's inbox was flooded. But it wasn't just digital. Someone left flowers at our door. A group of students chalked the sidewalk in front of our building with messages like, "Love wins," and "Cuba Libre." But we also got threats. Emails. Slurs. Even a voicemail saying, "Your kind doesn't get to rewrite the rules." Lucia played it on speaker and looked at me. "I'm not afraid," she said. Neither was I. Because now the world was watching. The day after the article went viral, my phone rang non-stop. Reporters, distant relatives, even an old friend from high school who suddenly wanted to reconnect. But the call I wasn't expecting came at 7:43 a.m. "Mark." My mother's voice was tight. Controlled. "What have you done?" I took a breath. "Told the truth. You put our names in the press. You embarrassed us. Do you know what this is doing to your father? Is it worse than what you tried to do to Lucia?" Silence. "You betrayed your own blood," she hissed. I nearly laughed. "No, Mom. You did." Before she could reply, I hung up. I sat on the edge of our bed and let the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt like I had finally crossed a line there was no coming back from. Lucia came in and wrapped her arms around me from behind. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I meant it. The backlash hit quickly. My father was asked to step down as HOA president, pending investigation. The HOA itself issued a public statement distancing itself from his actions, promising to review leadership conduct. He didn't take it well. Lily told me he'd stopped going outside. That my mother started covering the windows. That neighbors were avoiding them at the grocery store. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. Because this was never about revenge. It was about accountability. And sometimes, accountability is its own kind of punishment. At night, Lucia and I would sit on the balcony, just like we used to. We didn't talk much during those hours. We didn't need to. It was enough to know we were still here, together, despite everything. The following Saturday, a group of students from Lucia's university organized a peaceful protest outside our building. They held signs, chanted messages of unity, and handed out flyers with information about tenant rights. Lucia was nervous. "It's going to draw more attention," she said. "That's the point," I replied. She smiled weakly. "I didn't ask for any of this. But you didn't hide from it, either." She nodded, then squeezed my hand. When we stepped outside and saw the crowd, more than 150 people standing under the midday sun, I felt something shift inside me. Not just pride. Power. One of the organizers handed Lucia a megaphone. She hesitated, then took it. "My name is Lucia Ortega," she began. "I'm Cuban. I'm a student. I'm your neighbor. And I belong here." Cheers erupted. I stood beside her as she told her story. About the inspections. The threats. The silence. "But we're not afraid anymore," she said. "Because we are not alone." Later that night, we sat in bed, scrolling through the photos and videos people had tagged us in. "I never imagined I'd be this person," she whispered. "The girl on the balcony with a megaphone." I laughed. "You've always been that girl. The world just finally saw it." 3 days after the protest, a thick white envelope arrived. It had the HOA's official logo in the corner. Inside was a formal notice. After review, the board has voted unanimously to remove Harold Carter from his leadership position. We recognize that recent events have reflected poorly on our community. We commit to ensuring fair treatment for all residents, regardless of origin or background. There it was. The fall of the man who once dictated which flags could fly on front porches and which families were appropriate for block parties. My father, the symbol of control, of restriction, of prejudice, was officially out. I showed the letter to Lucia. She stared at it for a long time before finally saying, "Does it feel like a win?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. "But not because they punished him. Because they couldn't ignore us anymore." That evening, I received an unexpected email from a high school student across the country. She wrote, "I showed your story to my parents. We've been fighting for months because I'm dating someone from Honduras. They read your article, and for the first time, they actually listened. Thank you." I read it twice, then passed it to Lucia. She smiled, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's living so truthfully that it forces others to change. For the first time in months, the air felt still. Not like the suffocating stillness that follows a threat, but the kind that lets you breathe again. The HOA scandal had died down. The media attention faded. We went back to living like ordinary people again. At least, on the surface. But I could tell Lucia was still carrying it all in her chest. We both were. It showed in little ways. She double-checked the door at night, even though we lived in a secure building. She flinched slightly every time someone rang the bell. And I kept my phone on silent, not because I was tired of the noise, but because I couldn't stand another unknown number. "I think we should get away for a while," I told her one night. She looked up from the book she was reading. "Away where?" "Anywhere that doesn't know our names." Her lips curled into the faintest smile. "I could use that." So we booked a weekend trip to Asheville. Mountains, air, trees, space to breathe. The cabin was small and rustic, tucked into the side of a quiet hill. We arrived after dark, and everything smelled like pine and wood smoke. We cooked pasta over a tiny stove and ate sitting on the floor, legs tangled, laughter echoing into the beams. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, no cameras, just us. It was the first time in months that we felt like we weren't characters in someone else's controversy. "I needed this more than I thought," Lucia said, tracing her fingers along my jawline. "Me too." We didn't talk about the article, or my parents, or the neighborhood. We just existed. And for the first time, existing felt like enough. Back in the city, life started to settle. Lucia returned to school, and I picked up more freelance work. We rejoined the rhythm of the everyday: coffee, traffic, grocery lists. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't the kind of knock that made your stomach turn. It was soft, hesitant. When I opened the door, I found Lily. My sister. She looked smaller somehow, like life had peeled something away from her. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She held out a pie. Store-bought. Awkward. Perfectly Lily. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and she walked in slowly, like she was afraid to break something. Lucia was in the kitchen, headphones on. I waved her over. Lily smiled nervously. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began. "For not standing up for you. For not calling. For pretending I didn't see what was happening." Lucia said nothing, but I saw her shoulders relax slightly. "I let them control everything," Lily continued. "What I said, what I thought, who I believed. But I've been watching, reading, and I see now. I really see it." She looked at Lucia. "You didn't deserve any of it. And I was wrong for not defending you." There was a long silence. Then Lucia nodded. "Thank you." That was all she said. And somehow, it was enough. After Lily's visit, something shifted in me. For so long, I had lived in reaction, responding to attacks, shielding Lucia, bracing for judgment. But now, for the first time, I began to wonder what came next. Not just survival, but growth. Lucia and I started hosting dinners. At first, it was just a couple of friends. Then Lily came. Then a neighbor brought her partner. Soon, we had a table of 8 every other Friday. Different accents, different backgrounds, same laughter. One night, after everyone had gone home, Lucia turned to me and said, "I never thought I'd have this again." Community. I smiled. "You created it." "No," she said. "We did." And it was true. We had taken the broken pieces left behind by fear and built something beautiful. Something stronger than the hate that tried to tear us apart. Something that didn't just survive. Something that thrived. It started as a joke. Lucia and I were trying to figure out what to cook for the next Friday dinner when she said, "You know what would be wild? Inviting my cousin Mariella and her entire crew for Sunday lunch. Loud, chaotic, Cuban-style chaos. Is that a threat or an invitation?" I asked, laughing. She smiled. "Depends. You ready to meet the other half of me?" I froze for half a second, then nodded. Absolutely. That Sunday, our tiny apartment turned into Havana. Mariella arrived with 3 kids, a boisterous uncle who immediately started fixing our wobbly table leg, and a cousin who insisted on DJing from his phone. Lucia's aunt brought flan that made me question everything I thought I knew about dessert. The walls pulsed with music and Spanish and laughter. I barely understood half of what was said, but I didn't need to. I could feel it in my chest. Love. Family. Noise. All things I'd grown up with in a different flavor. Lucia looked at me from across the room and mouthed, "Too much." I shook my head. Never. Later that night, after everyone had left and the dishes were done, we collapsed onto the couch. "You okay?" she asked. I smiled. "I think I just got adopted by your whole family." She laughed. "That's what happens when you survive Cuban lunch. You're in for life." "Good," I said. "Because I don't want out." It had been months since I'd seen either of my parents. Then, one Wednesday morning, I opened the door and found my father standing in the hallway. He looked older. Smaller. No drink in his hand. No scowl. Just tired. "I won't stay," he said. "I just wanted to give you something." He handed me a thin envelope and stepped back. I opened it right there. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. My mother's handwriting. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect contact. But I saw the way you looked at her in that article photo. I remembered how your grandfather used to look at your grandmother when she spoke Spanish to him in the kitchen. And I felt ashamed. We tried to protect you from something that didn't exist. And in doing so, we became the threat instead. I don't know if we'll ever make it right. But I hope, someday, you'll believe we wanted to." No apology. But maybe the beginning of one. I looked up. My father was still there, eyes unreadable. "Tell her I read it," I said. He nodded once. Then turned and left. Lucia read it that night. When she finished, she said nothing. Just slid it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer with her passport, birth certificate, and other documents that proved her identity. She didn't need an apology to validate her worth. But she let me hold her a little longer that night. We were asked to speak again, this time, not to a journalist, but to a classroom. A professor at Lucia's university had reached out. "It's a sociology course," he said. "They're studying immigration and social identity. Your story is part of that reality now." Lucia hesitated at first. What if they just want drama? "Then we give them truth instead," I said. We stood in front of 80 students in a cramped lecture hall. I wasn't nervous until I saw the first row of students start typing, eyes wide. Lucia took a breath. "My name is Lucia Ortega. This is Mark. We didn't start out trying to fight anything. We just fell in love." I followed her lead. And falling in love meant facing things we didn't expect. But it also meant finding out who we are, and what we're willing to stand up for. We spoke for 45 minutes. Afterward, one student came up and said, "My parents are like yours. But I've never had the words to explain why it hurt. You just gave them to me." On the way home, Lucia leaned her head on my shoulder. You think anyone else is still listening? She asked. I glanced out the window, city lights flickering past us. I think someone out there is hearing our story right now and realizing they're not alone. If you're hearing it too, thank you. Thank you for listening. These stories don't end in headlines, they live in hearts, in choices, in tiny moments of courage. And if our journey moved you in any way, don't forget to stay connected. Stories like this only matter because people like you carry them forward. We were lying on the floor of our living room, watching the ceiling fan spin, when Lucia said something that caught me completely off guard. If we ever had kids, what language would we raise them in? I turned my head toward her, surprised. I mean, I never really thought that far ahead, I admitted. But Spanish, definitely. And English. Maybe both. She smiled. I was just thinking about how many stories would be passed down differently. What they'd grow up hearing. What they'd be allowed to become. There was a long silence between us, comfortable, but full of meaning. Would you want that? I asked quietly. A family. She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. Not now. But someday. With the right person. I swallowed hard and reached for her hand. What if I already know who the right person is? She turned to me, eyes soft. Then I guess we just need to figure out when. That night, I sat on the balcony by myself while Lucia graded papers. I looked up at the city skyline and felt something I hadn't felt since before everything began. Hope. Real, unfiltered, unshaken hope. Not because the world was perfect, but because I had finally chosen to live truthfully in it. It came from a burner number. No name. No contact photo. Just a single sentence. Your mom's in the hospital. I stared at the screen, unsure if it was real. Unsure if I should care. Lucia walked in as I was rereading it for the third time. Everything okay? I showed her the message. She placed her hand over mine. What do you want to do? That was the question. Not what should I do, but what do I want? I want to know she's okay, I said. And that was enough. We went to the hospital together. Lily met us in the lobby. She fainted at the grocery store, she explained. Just stress. Low blood pressure. But she's stable. We stepped into the room, and there she was. My mother, pale, smaller, without her pearls and sharp voice. She looked at Lucia first. And then at me. You came. I nodded. Yeah. Lucia stayed by the door, giving me space. My mother reached out a hand. I hesitated, then took it. You're not the boy I raised, she whispered. No, I said. I'm the man I became in spite of it. She blinked slowly, then nodded. I'm sorry, she said. It was barely audible, like the words were foreign on her tongue. But she said them, and that mattered. 6 months later, we flew to Cuba. Lucia hadn't been back in nearly a decade. I'd never been. But the moment we stepped off the plane, I could feel her come alive in a way I hadn't yet seen. Her cousins met us with hugs and laughter. Her old neighborhood was full of peeling paint, loud music, and open windows. This, she said, twirling in the street one afternoon, is home. Her grandmother made me arroz con pollo and told me, in Spanish, that I looked too skinny to be marrying her granddaughter. Marrying? I asked. Lucia blushed and waved her off. She assumes. Later that night, as we walked along the water in Malecon, Lucia turned to me and said, She's not wrong, you know. I stopped walking. About what? You, me, this. I smiled. You sure? She nodded. Absolutely. So I knelt right there on the sidewalk, pulled the ring out of my pocket, I had brought it just in case, and asked her to marry me. She said yes. Even the ocean cheered. We didn't want a fancy ceremony. No ballrooms. No chandeliers. No matching linens or complicated seating charts. We wanted real. We wanted us. We chose a community garden not far from where we had our first real kiss, a tucked-away green space filled with wildflowers and shaded by big old oaks. Lucia wore a cream-colored dress with lace along the sleeves. I wore a white shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, with a guayabera-style finish to honor her roots. Lily stood by my side. Lucia's cousin Mariella stood by hers. And Nora, yes, our lawyer-turned-family, officiated the ceremony. "Love is not the absence of struggle," she said as we stood hand in hand. "It's the decision to fight for someone again and again, even when the world tells you not to." I looked at Lucia, and she looked back with eyes full of everything we'd survived. I barely heard my own vows, because I was too busy feeling them. After the ceremony, we danced barefoot on the grass. Cuban music filled the air, and a food truck served lechon and tamales alongside sweet iced tea and American-style sliders. It was the perfect collision of who we had been and who we'd become. Later that night, under strings of fairy lights, Lucia leaned into my ear and whispered, "We made it." I pulled her close. "And we're just getting started." 2 weeks after the wedding, an envelope arrived in the mail. No name on the outside. Just my address, handwritten. Inside was a letter. "Mark, I watched the live stream of your wedding. I didn't think I would, but I couldn't help myself. You looked happy. Really happy. And I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. I raised you to be a leader. But I expected you to follow. That wasn't fair. I taught you to stand up for what you believe in, but I punished you when your beliefs weren't mine. That wasn't right. I don't know how to fix what I did. Maybe I never will. But I do know this, you made the right choice. And if Lucia will ever let me, I'd like to meet her again. Properly this time. Dad." I read it 3 times. Then I handed it to Lucia. She read it once, folded it neatly, and said, "If he's willing to come as himself, he's welcome at our table." And just like that, we started setting one more place at dinner. After the wedding, Lucia and I didn't take a honeymoon. Instead, we started something bigger. We launched a small community initiative, bilingual storytelling workshops for immigrant families. We wanted to help people like us, couples who'd fought for love, families navigating identity, kids learning to speak in 2 tongues and live in 2 worlds. We called it puentes, bridges. Because that's what we had learned to build. Not just between languages or cultures, but between pain and healing. Between truth and acceptance. Our first workshop was held in the same community center where Lucia once attended English classes. 20 people showed up. Then 50. Then 100. And the stories they told. A Syrian father reunited with his son after 5 years. A Mexican woman who'd worked in silence for 2 decades finally reading her poetry aloud. A Haitian teenager writing her first college essay in English, with metaphors in Creole. Lucia cried the whole way home after that session. "Do you think your parents will ever understand this?" she asked. "Maybe not," I said. "But I think mine are starting to try." And maybe, I realized, that was enough. We were invited to speak at a citywide diversity conference, one of those events hosted by universities and civic leaders looking to show progress. I was skeptical. I didn't want us to be used as symbols, as neatly packaged proof that society was evolving. But Lucia saw it differently. "If even one person in that room rethinks their silence," she said, "then it's worth it." So we said yes. The auditorium was bigger than I expected, rows of folding chairs filled with students, teachers, activists, and quiet professionals in business-casual blazers. On stage, we sat beside 4 other speakers, a Vietnamese poet, a dreamer studying law, a Haitian restaurant owner, and a second-generation Pakistani journalist. When it was our turn, Lucia took the mic first. "I used to think I had to choose between being Cuban and being accepted here," she began. "But the truth is, that choice was never mine to make. It was forced on me. By people who feared difference more than they understood it." She glanced at me and smiled. Falling in love taught me that resistance doesn't always look like protest signs. Sometimes, it looks like burnt pancakes and long conversations and building a life that was never meant to exist. I spoke next. I talked about my parents, my upbringing, the slow process of unlearning, and how loving Lucia had rewritten my definition of loyalty. Not to blood, but to truth. After the panel, a young man came up to us, barely 18, maybe younger. Eyes full of something I recognized from months ago, fear and possibility. I think I'm ready to tell my parents about my girlfriend, he said quietly. She's Nigerian. They'll freak out. But I think I'm ready. Lucia placed a hand on his shoulder. Tell her first. Then tell them. Because the one who chooses to stay by your side, that's the one worth fighting with. That fall, we invited my father for dinner. He came alone. Lucia cooked ropa vieja and served it with warm tortillas and a side of cautious silence. I made a salad that no one touched. We sat at the table for a long time, eating slowly, sipping wine, avoiding landmines. Finally, my father cleared his throat. I read about your non-profit, he said to Lucia. Puentes. That's bridges, right? She nodded. Yes. He looked down at his plate. I wish someone had built one for me a long time ago. The room went still. You can help build one now, I said. He nodded. Lucia passed him the flan. And somehow, that was the most peace we'd ever shared. Later that night, after he'd left, I asked her how she felt. Tired, she said. But hopeful. That was us. Always tired. Always hopeful. 1 year after we launched Puentes, we held our first public showcase. Families shared stories on stage. Kids read poetry. A young woman from Venezuela sang a song her grandmother taught her. I sat in the back of the room, holding Lucia's hand, watching it all unfold. Then one of our students, a 13-year-old girl from Colombia, walked on stage and said, I was afraid to speak at school. I thought my accent made me sound wrong. But now I know it makes me sound like home. Lucia squeezed my hand. This is it, she whispered. What is? The revenge. I smiled. She was right. This wasn't about burning bridges. It was about building new ones, and walking across them, hand in hand. We weren't looking for a house. Not really. Lucia said it started as a dream, then became a joke, then a Pinterest board. I didn't even know we were serious until she showed me a listing one morning while brushing her teeth. This one, she said. It's old, but it's got bones. I laughed. You mean it's falling apart? She nodded. But it's the good kind of broken. Like us. The house was a faded yellow bungalow on the edge of a neighborhood in transition. Not quite suburban, not quite urban. It had a porch swing, a crooked chimney, and a patchy yard full of possibility. We made an offer. The bank accepted. And just like that, we became homeowners. We didn't hire contractors. We did it all ourselves. Lucia learned how to rewire outlets from YouTube. I spent weekends ripping out carpet and laying down tile with the help of her uncles. The neighbors would pass by, wave, and sometimes stop to offer a tip, or a tamale. It was exhausting. It was messy, but it was ours. One night, we sat on the living room floor surrounded by paint cans and open pizza boxes. This is the same girl who had to defend her right to live here not that long ago, Lucia said. And now you own a home 2 blocks away from the country club that once rejected your accent. She grinned. Poetic, isn't it? Almost like a happy ending. She shook her head. Not an ending. Just the next chapter. A month after we moved in, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a manila envelope filled with documents, a photo of my grandfather holding a young Cuban boy outside a church, a copy of a newspaper article from the 1960s about refugee sponsorship programs, and a short, typed letter. Dear Mark, before your father was who he is now, He was a boy who grew up watching my father help Cuban families find housing and work in this country. We were raised on stories of migration and generosity, though somewhere along the way, we forgot what that meant. Maybe you reminded him. You reminded all of us. Thank you for rebuilding what we lost. An old friend of the Carter family. I sat with the letter for a long time. Then I passed it to Lucia. She read it quietly, folded it, and tucked it into our bookshelf. This is our history now, she said. Not theirs. And I realized something. The story hadn't just come full circle. We'd redrawn it. We turned the smallest room in the house into a guest room. Bright walls, clean linens, shelves lined with books in both English and Spanish. Not for family. Not yet. But for anyone who needed a soft landing. Lucia called it La Habitation del Courage, the Room of Courage. Because everyone who stayed there, she said, would be someone rebuilding, just like we had. One evening, after a quiet dinner, I found her sitting in that room, staring out the window. You okay? I asked. She nodded. Just thinking about what it took to get here. I sat beside her. You ever wish things had gone differently? She shook her head. No. Because even if I had to walk through fire to find this life, I'd do it again. She turned to me. And if someone out there is walking through that fire right now, maybe hearing our story makes them feel less alone. So if you're hearing this, if you've made it to this point in our story, thank you. Thank you for listening. Because love, real love, doesn't always look like fairy tales. Sometimes it looks like legal paperwork and late-night anxiety and paint-stained hands. But it's worth it. And if our story moved you in any way, stay close. Share it. Pass it forward. Someone out there needs to know that what they're fighting for is possible. We hadn't planned on having a child so soon. Honestly, we were still figuring out how to assemble furniture without fighting. But life has its own timing. Lucia was the first to know, obviously. She came out of the bathroom holding the test like it was a handwritten prophecy. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, eyes wide, then slowly, tears began to fall. You're pregnant, I whispered. She nodded. I'm scared. I pulled her into me. Me too. But we've been scared before. And look where we are now, she said with a small laugh. When we told our families, the reactions were better than expected. Her cousins cried. Mariella sent baby clothes from Miami. My father, he asked if he could help build the crib. It was slow, clumsy reconciliation, but it was real. We didn't want a traditional baby shower. We invited everyone who'd ever been part of Puentes. Immigrant moms. Dads who worked 3 jobs. Kids who translated phone bills for their parents. Students who were writing their first poems in a second language. They brought handmade gifts, tiny shoes, and letters in Spanglish written for the baby to read one day. Lucia stood in the center of it all, glowing, not because she was pregnant, but because she was finally fully seen. Fully loved. I want our child to grow up knowing exactly who they are, she said in her toast. Not torn between cultures, but rooted in both. I raised my glass. To the baby who'll speak with 2 tongues, love with a full heart, and know, without question, that they belong. A few months after our daughter was born, Lucia and I sat outside by the fire pit. The baby monitor was by my side. The stars were bright. The night was cool. I used to think revenge was loud, Lucia said, poking the fire with a stick. Same, I replied. I thought it had to hurt the way I was hurt. She looked at me. But now. I looked at the monitor. At the soft static hum of our daughter breathing safely in her crib. Now I know revenge can be soft, I said. It can look like peace. Like growth. Like refusing to let bitterness take root. She nodded. It can look like love. The next morning, I opened a letter from the mayor's office. Our community project, Puentes, was being recognized with a civic award. Not for its size. Not for its numbers. But for its impact. Lucia laughed. Your parents would have loved this. Their son, accepting a government award for celebrating immigration. Maybe that's the real twist, I said. They raised me to be proud of this country. And I am. Proud enough to want it to live up to what it promises. As the sun rose, our daughter started crying. Lucia went to pick her up. I followed. And in that quiet moment, watching my wife cradle our child in a house we built with calloused hands and courageous hearts, I realized. This was the vengeance they never saw coming. Not rebellion. Not destruction. But creation. Love, in its purest form, is resistance. And our life, imperfect, multilingual, beautiful, was the loudest answer to all the hate we'd faced. We didn't just survive. We turned their fear into something they could never control. Hope.